74,000 years ago, the human race almost ceased to exist, not from war, not from disease, not from anything we did to each other, from a mountain. A single mountain on an island in what is now Indonesia erupted with a force so incomprehensible, so absolute, so total that it plunged the entire planet into darkness. And when the ash finally settled, the human species had been reduced to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 people. The entire human race, every person alive on Earth at that moment, fewer than the number of people who might fill a single small stadium. And from those few thousand survivors, every single human being alive today descended. You are here because they made it, and the story of how they made it is one of the most extraordinary survival stories in the history of life on this planet. Stay with me, because what happened 74,000 years ago did not just almost end us, it shaped everything about who we are today, and almost nobody has ever told you this story. Let's start with the mountain itself, because nothing in recorded human history comes close to what Mount Toba did. Mount Toba sits on the Indonesian island of Sumatra. Today, it is one of the most beautiful lakes in the world, Lake Toba. Tourists visit it, people swim in it. It looks peaceful, serene, ancient in the way that beautiful things look ancient. But what sits beneath the surface of that lake is the remains of one of the most violent geological events in the last 2.5 million years of Earth history. 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba did not erupt, it exploded. There is a difference. A normal volcanic eruption, the kind that makes the news, the kind that destroys a city or two and fills the sky with ash for a few weeks, typically ejects somewhere between 1 and 10 cubic kilometers of material. The 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, which killed 57 people and flattened 600 square kilometers of forest, ejected about 1 cubic kilometer of material. It was considered catastrophic. Mount Toba ejected 2,800 cubic kilometers, not 10, not 100, 2,800. It was over 10,000 times larger than Mount St. Helens. The explosion blasted a crater 62 miles long and 18 miles wide into the Earth. The ash cloud that rose from that crater reached the stratosphere within hours, and then it spread outward in every direction across the entire planet. Within days, ash was falling on India. Within weeks, it was measurable across South Asia, the Middle East, and East Africa. Researchers have found Toba ash layers in archaeological sites thousands of miles from Sumatra, a thin gray line in the geological record, the fingerprint of the day the sky broke. But the ash was only the beginning, because what the ash did to the atmosphere was what nearly killed everything. When that much material is blasted into the stratosphere, it does something specific and devastating. It blocks sunlight, not partially, not dimly. It blocks it in a way that drops temperatures across the entire planet almost immediately. Climate models suggest that in the years following the Toba eruption, average global temperatures dropped by somewhere between 3 and 15 degrees Celsius. The lower estimates are bad enough. The higher estimates represent conditions so extreme that large portions of the Earth's surface would have become essentially uninhabitable. What followed was a volcanic winter. The sun still rose every morning, but less of its light reached the surface. Plants, which depend entirely on sunlight to grow, began to fail. Forests thinned. Grasslands died back. The food chains that millions of species depended on began to collapse from the bottom up. Animals that ate plants died. Animals that ate those animals died. And the humans who depended on both for survival were suddenly facing a world that had stopped providing. And if you think the growing food was bad, the water was worse. The volcanic gases that Toba released into the atmosphere combined with water vapor to produce sulfuric acid, which came back down as rain, acid rain, poisoning water sources, killing vegetation that had survived the cold, stripping the thin protective layer of life from vast stretches of land. This is what 74,000 years ago actually looked like. Not the dramatic fire and lava of movie volcanoes, a slow, cold, gray, hungry darkness that lasted not days or weeks, but years.
Some researchers estimate the volcanic winter lasted up to 6 years. 6 years of reduced sunlight, 6 years of failing crops, 6 years of dying forests and poisoned water, and cold that should not exist in places where people had always been warm. If this is already making you feel something, hit subscribe, because there is a lot more where this came from, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Now here is the question that has haunted researchers since this story first emerged. How many people were alive on Earth before Toba erupted? The honest answer is, we don't know exactly. Our species, Homo sapiens, had been walking the Earth for roughly 240,000 years by the time Toba happened. We had spread from Africa into parts of Asia and the Middle East. Population estimates for pre-Toba humans range from several 100,000 to perhaps 1 million individuals spread across a vast and challenging planet. Not many, but enough. Enough to be established, enough to have communities and knowledge and tools and the beginnings of culture. And then Toba happened, and the numbers collapsed. The evidence for what happened next comes not from archaeology, but from something far more personal, your own DNA. In 1998, anthropologist Stanley Ambrose made a connection that changed how scientists understood human prehistory. He noticed something strange about the genetic diversity of modern humans. There isn't much of it. Compared to almost any other large mammal species on Earth, humans are remarkably similar to one another. In fact, there is less genetic diversity in the entire 8 billion-strong human population today than there is in a single troop of 50 chimpanzees living in a forest in Central Africa. That should not be possible for a species that has been around for 300,000 years. Genetic diversity accumulates over time. The longer a species exists, the more variation appears in its genome, unless something happens that kills most of the population and forces the survivors to rebuild from an extremely small genetic starting point, unless a species passes through what geneticists call a bottleneck. Ambrose proposed that Toba caused exactly that, a genetic bottleneck so severe that the entire human population was reduced to just a few thousand individuals, and all the genetic diversity that had accumulated over the previous hundreds of thousands of years was largely lost because most of the people who carried it died. The genetic data from modern humans supports this. Our DNA suggests that at some point between 70 and 80,000 years ago, the human population experienced a catastrophic reduction. Multiple independent genetic studies have pointed to this same window of time, a moment when the thread of human existence became so thin that it could have snapped entirely. And that moment lines up almost exactly with the Toba eruption. But here is where the story gets complicated and more interesting.
Because the archaeological evidence does not perfectly match the catastrophe hypothesis. In 2010, researchers working at a site called Pinnacle Point on the southern coast of South Africa found evidence of continuous human habitation through the Toba event. The ash layer from Toba is visible in the geological record at the site, but the tools, the shellfish remains, the evidence of human activity, it continues right through that ash layer without a significant break. People were living there before Toba, and people were living there after Toba. The catastrophe did not erase them. Similar findings have emerged from sites in India, in East Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. In each location, researchers expected to find a gap in the archaeological record after the Toba ash layer, a silence, evidence of abandonment and death. Instead, they found something more remarkable: continuity, adaptation, survival. What does this tell us? It tells us that the Toba event did not kill humans uniformly across the planet. It killed some populations entirely, particularly those closest to the eruption and those living in environments that were already marginal. But other populations, living in the right places with the right resources and the right knowledge, found ways to survive. And this is the part of the story that matters most. Not how Toba almost destroyed us, but how we survived it. The populations that made it through the volcanic winter shared certain characteristics. They were living in environments that provided refuges from the worst effects of the cooling. The southern coast of Africa, where the Pinnacle Point people lived, was kept relatively stable by the moderating influence of the ocean.
Sea surface temperatures do not drop as quickly as land temperatures. The food resources of the coastline, shellfish, fish, marine mammals, are buffered from the kind of catastrophic failure that hit inland plant-based food sources. The people at Pinnacle Point were already exploiting the ocean. They were eating shellfish. They were using red ochre for what appear to be symbolic purposes. They were using heat to improve the quality of their stone tools, a sophisticated multi-step process that requires planning, knowledge, and the ability to think about a future outcome and work backward to achieve it. These were not simple people. These were cognitively sophisticated human beings who had developed a diverse enough set of skills and food sources to absorb a catastrophic environmental shock without collapsing. And in East Africa, researchers working at sites along what was once the shore of a massive lake system found a similar story: humans surviving, adapting, changing their behavior in response to the changed environment, moving to exploit new resources, innovating. There's a 2026 study published in Science that analyzed volcanic glass particles from archaeological sites across the Horn of Africa and found that human populations in that region not only survived the Toba event, but showed evidence of behavioral innovation in its aftermath. New tool technologies, new food sources, new patterns of movement, as if the catastrophe, rather than destroying human culture, had in some ways accelerated it, forced adaptations that would not otherwise have been necessary. This is what humans do. It is the thing that defines us more than any tool or language or piece of art. We adapt. We find another way. We look at a changed world and we figure out how to live in it. But let us not romanticize this too much, because for most of the human beings alive 74,000 years ago, the volcanic winter was not a story of adaptation and survival. It was simply death. Slow, cold, hungry death over weeks and months and years as the world they had always known became something unrecognizable. Communities that had existed for generations vanished. Knowledge that had been accumulated over lifetimes and passed down through storytelling and demonstration simply stopped existing when the last person who held it died. Languages disappeared. Traditions disappeared. Entire ways of being human disappeared. What survived was a remnant, a fraction, the few thousand people who happened to be in the right place with the right skills and the right resources when the sky went dark. And here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. Those few thousand people are your direct ancestors, every single one of them. The people at Pinnacle Point eating shellfish on a cold, gray beach with ash in the air. The people in East Africa finding new tools and new food sources as the forests thinned. Whatever small, scattered groups of humans managed to hold on through 6 years of volcanic winter, they are your family, directly, without interruption. The line from them to you runs through every generation that came after, without a single break. Every decision they made, every adaptation they found, every night they survived that should have killed them, all of it led, eventually, inevitably, to you sitting here right now, listening to this. There's something else the Toba bottleneck left behind, something that is written in your body right now and shapes your life in ways you have never thought about. Because when a species passes through a genetic bottleneck that severe, it does not just lose diversity, it also loses genetic variants that were previously distributed across a large population. Some of those lost variants may have been protective against certain diseases. Some may have been associated with certain physical traits that simply no longer exist in any living human. The Toba event did not just reduce our numbers, it permanently altered the genetic makeup of our species. It determined, in a very literal sense, which human genes would survive into the future and which would not. There's also the matter of what the bottleneck did to human language and culture. Some linguists have proposed that the dramatic reduction in human population during the Toba period may actually explain something that has long puzzled researchers about the origin of language. Modern human language, with its full complexity of grammar, syntax, and abstraction, appears to emerge in the archaeological record relatively suddenly after a long period of simpler symbolic behavior. Some researchers have suggested that this explosion of linguistic and cultural complexity, sometimes called the Great Leap Forward in human cognition, may have been connected to the Toba bottleneck, that the intense selective pressure of survival, combined with the reduced but closely cooperating population that emerged from the catastrophe, may have accelerated the development of full language and complex culture in ways that a larger, more dispersed population would not have experienced. We're not certain of this, but the timing is interesting, and the idea that one of the darkest moments in human history may have also been a crucible for some of our most distinctly human capacities is the kind of complicated truth that the past keeps offering us if we're willing to look. Now, let's talk about what would happen today, because Mount Toba is not dead. Lake Toba sits above one of the most geologically active systems on Earth. The magma chamber beneath it is still there, still hot, still present. Geologists classify Toba as a resurgent caldera, a volcanic system capable of future eruptions of the same magnitude as the one 74,000 years ago. The probability of another Toba-scale eruption in any given century is extremely low, but the probability of one occurring at some point in the geological future is not zero. And if it happened today, the outcome would be different in some ways. We have global early warning systems. We have food storage and distribution networks. We have sealed greenhouses and hydroponic agriculture that can function without sunlight. We have the scientific understanding to know what's coming and to begin preparing. But the scale of the challenge would be unlike anything modern civilization has ever faced. 6 years of reduced sunlight, 6 years of failed harvests across most of the planet, billions of people, not thousands, dependent on food systems that would fail within months of a Toba-scale eruption. The researchers studying this are not alarmists, they're careful. They point out that humanity today is far more resilient than the small scattered populations of 74,000 years ago. But they also point out that resilience is not the same as immunity, and that the story of Toba is ultimately not a story about catastrophe. It's a story about the gap between catastrophe and extinction, and what fills that gap. What fills that gap is exactly what filled it 74,000 years ago. Human beings, in small groups, in desperate circumstances, making decisions, finding food, sharing knowledge, protecting their children, adapting to a world that had become unrecognizable, refusing, in the most fundamental biological sense, to stop. They didn't know they were saving the human race. They were just trying to get through the next day, and the next, and the next, until the sky slowly, gradually, over years, began to lighten again, until the plants began to grow again, until the world that had been taken from them began, piece by piece, to return. And from those few thousand people who got through it, 8 billion of us grew. The next time the world feels overwhelming, the next time things feel impossibly hard and the odds feel impossibly long, remember that you come from people who survived the end of the world, literally, who looked at 6 years of volcanic winter with nothing but their hands and their knowledge and each other and got through it anyway. That capacity did not disappear. It's in you, written in your DNA by the survivors of the worst thing that ever happened to us. We almost didn't make it, but we did, and the fact that you're here is proof of that. If this video shifted something in the way you see yourself in the world, subscribe to Wise Jack and drop a like so more people find